Hello and welcome to the Kangaroo English podcast. My name is Christian and today is Thursday, the best day of the week. At the moment I am reading this book called Animal Languages by the Dutch author Eva Majid. It's probably a bad pronunciation of her name, but she's a Dutch author, and in fact she has a PhD in philosophy, and she taught animal philosophy at the University of Amsterdam. Animal philosophy. And the book is super fascinating because it challenges some fundamental ideas about well, I don't want to be too dramatic, but it challenges some fundamental ideas about, in a way, what it means to be human, because a big part of the book is showing how, as humans, we have created an artificial distinction, an artificial separation between animals, like other animals, and then humans. And, we feel like we are at the top of the hierarchy. We are the greatest animals on earth. But we're only great when we judge ourselves by human standards, right? And so for example, compared to dogs' ability to follow scents, to follow smells, we don't have that ability. So in that respect, if you judged us by our ability to follow a trail using smell, we would fail that test. We would be considered stupid and useless, right? If we were judged by dog standards, humans don't have the endurance of a dog or the pain threshold of a dog. And what's really interesting and something that I learnt from making my podcasts with Dan Everett is that even within human cultures, different abilities are considered important or unimportant. And, he was talking about when he was in the Brazilian rainforest with the Amazonian hunter-gatherers, with the Amazonian tribes, they considered him pretty useless and pretty stupid. He had none of the skills that were important to them. He couldn't navigate the jungle. He couldn't kill animals because he couldn't shoot an arrow. All he did was sit and study their language. So, which is something that has no value for them. So, and the reason I'm telling you all this is because I think a big part of the key to success in learning a language is challenging your expectations, right? And so I just want to read a little bit from Eva's book. Okay, just one paragraph from her book. And here she's talking about why we separate human and animal languages. Why do we do that? She says, "It may seem far-fetched to think about the language of animals as if there were a huge gap between our forms of communication and theirs, as if human language were more elevated, something that animals will never be able to achieve. However, not that long ago, women were thought to be irrational and incapable of making political decisions. Colonized non-Western populations were once not taken seriously as participations in discussion either. The property rights of Aboriginals in Australia were not recognized, for example, because this was not in line with the European settlers' system of laws and regulations." And that particular paragraph in her book, that hit me really hard, because it made me realize how many of the things that we take for granted are probably not based in evidence. We take them for granted because of culture, and probably not for any other good reason. Now, I don't know if you know that expression, to take for granted, but that is our word of the day. So, to take for granted means to believe that something is true without questioning it. Okay? That's to take something for granted. So, if you tell me that your name is Esmeralda, okay, I take it for granted. I believe that it's true. But over time in English, this has taken on a negative meaning, which is that we take things for granted. We believe that they're true when we shouldn't. So, for example, we take our planet for granted. We believe that the planet will always be here for us. We'll always have food to eat, and we'll always have a safe environment. But we shouldn't believe that that's true. We shouldn't take it for granted. And taking people for granted is also a common thing. It's a classic kind of stereotype that a lot of men take their wives for granted. They expect that their wives will cook for them and clean for them and do all those things, and they believe that that is true. They take it for granted. But it's a dangerous thing, because wives can leave, and as we can see, our planets can fall apart. And what's really interesting about the word, which is very obvious from its meaning, is that grant comes from the same Latin root as a lot of words in modern European languages. So, for example, in Spanish we have creer, which means to believe. And the creer is the same root as the word grant. So if you look, you can see we have that switch from the k to the g, which is something that can easily happen, right? Because k and g they're made in a very similar part of the mouth. A lot of sound changes, that's how sound changes happen. They happen in the same part of the mouth. You have a m becomes a b. It would be strange if a m became a oo, because they're not made using the same human sound instruments. But since we're talking about things that we take for granted, and since we're talking about language learning, I've been thinking a lot about this topic recently, about how many things students take for granted in the language learning process. And just to give you some examples of how dangerous that can be, there's been some research about learning synonyms. So pretty much every workbook that you open, and every exam preparation book will have a section inside the book with lists of vocabulary, right? So if chapter 2 is about the climate, or about the planet, then you'll have little boxes with similar words like planet, earth, world, sphere. You have all these synonyms, and on the surface it makes sense, right? Because you should understand that there are similar words that mean the same thing. And maybe if I feel like if I give you 10 words that are similar, it will reinforce that vocabulary, right? It will reinforce it. But that's not actually what happens in the brain. What happens in the brain is that all of those words, because they're so similar, they start to compete. They start to fight with each other. So the research has shown that trying to learn words that are similar will actually mean that it will take you 50 to 100% longer to remember those words. So that means that it could take you twice as long. You have to see that word twice as many times before you remember it if you're studying in the wrong way. And this is the way that we take for granted, because it's the way that everybody's teaching vocabulary. The research tells us that it's wrong. Why are we taking it for granted? We need to be more revolutionary. And another thing about learning vocabulary is that the research shows that a quarter of your time should be just reading. Now, if you are in, let's say you're in government education, or even if you're paying for language, private language classes with a teacher, how many teachers do you think would say to their students, okay, just sit and read for this class. This whole class, just sit and read. Probably not many, right? Because teachers, they want to feel active. They take it for granted that their job is to be in the classroom teaching, always, filling their students with knowledge and information. But that's just another thing that we've taken for granted. Reading is an incredible source of vocabulary. And so teachers should be saying to their students, listen, today we're just going to read. That's it. Just grab a book and sit and read. Now, I know that you might be thinking, well, okay, but if I'm paying for a class with a teacher, I want them to be, doing something. I don't want them to just sit behind their desk while I read. But what you have to remember is that you're paying essentially for time, right? And you're paying essentially for a place which is dedicated to your learning. And you have to be honest and say to yourself, well, if you didn't have that 45 minutes or that 1 hour to read with that teacher, would you actually have the discipline or the time to do it on your own? Would you actually sit for an hour and read instead of, watching Netflix or going out with your friends or whatever you like to do? So maybe it is okay to just sit and read with your teacher. Maybe it seems like a waste of money, but that's just something that you're taking for granted when you shouldn't, because sitting and reading would be an incredible boost to your vocabulary. So I think the lesson that I want you to remember from this podcast today is that you have to question everything. You have to ask yourself if you're doing something just because you're taking it for granted as a habit, because that's the way that it's been done so many times, so let's continue doing it that way. Or ask yourself if it's something which is actually good for your learning and getting you results. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. I'm Christian, this is Kangaroo English, and I'll see you in class.